Okay, so we just finished our third step, which was peak compression in our vocal mixing process. And so let's now move on to squeeze compression. Now, if you remember, our peak compression was all about pulling down the peaks, right? So these moments where the waveform is noticeably higher and kind of sticks out above everything else. Peak compression is in some ways the opposite, where instead of only dealing with the peaks, we want to try to move everybody a little bit closer towards the middle. And so to do that, we're going to add another compressor, which again is in your dynamics category, compressor. Now at this point, I should also mention that the order in which you put your plugins very much does matter. So this compressor is going to be getting whatever the results are coming out of this compressor, and this compressor is getting whatever the results are that are coming out of our surgical EQ. So if I moved the order of these things around, then obviously they're going to react a little bit differently because they're getting a different input signal based on whatever came before them. Now, for our squeeze compression, we're going to use a little bit different settings than we did for our peak compression. For squeeze compression, we are, as I mentioned, we're going to make sure that this compressor is after the first one. But this time we're going to choose a different model. We're going to choose the Opto model, which is a model of the famous LA2A compressor. So just like in peak compression, we talked about the 1176 being a kind of famous name that you need to know. LA2A is probably the other big famous name that you should know as a music producer. So in Logic, that means we're going to go over here to the Vintage Opto and choose that setting instead. You'll notice we're going to turn on the auto gain for this compressor. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. But then we're going to set a lower ratio. We're going to set a relatively fast, but not super fast attack. And then we're going to set a noticeably slower release time for our compressor. And then we're also going to set this knee, which I'll explain in just a moment, all the way up to 1. So let's go back over here and let's deal with the threshold first. So we've already got our ratio set to 2 to 1. Now remember, the threshold is what controls when the compressor starts doing its work. So if the level never gets above the threshold, the compressor will never do anything. For squeeze compression, we want to see the needle moving basically anytime the vocal is happening. We want to try to squeeze everything just a little bit. And so we're going to adjust this threshold to the point where we see more or less constant needle movement, except of course when the vocal isn't actually making sound. You do what you want. You do. So you'll notice right now we're not getting any compression because the level is never getting high enough to actually trigger the compressor. So we're going to pull this guy down a little further. You do what you want. You do what you want to do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning. You do what you want. Now, as we're doing this, you notice that it's actually getting louder, which might seem a little counterintuitive because we know that the level is getting reduced. It's getting pulled down by the compressor. And so that means we need to talk about auto gain. So what auto gain does is anytime it pulls down the level, it tries to make a kind of counterbalance so that the overall gain, the average gain, is sitting up much closer to -12. And so that's why as we pull this down, what's happening is the difference between the peaks are getting less and less and less. So they're getting closer to the average level of the signal. And then as we raise it afterwards, that means the average signal is getting louder the more compression that we add. So that's why things are getting louder instead of quieter. Now notice if I turn auto gain off, things will actually get quieter. You do what you want. If I turn the threshold back up again where we're not doing much. You do what you want. As I pull this down. You do what you want to do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning. You do what you want. And then it will get even quieter if I increase the ratio. You do what you want. You do what you want to do. You do what you... Because now it's giving even more gain reduction. Now remember, with squeeze compression, we're trying to be gentle. We don't want to hear the compression. We just want to just kind of squeeze everything very gently. You do what you want. Now I'm going to increase the release time a little bit. We said maybe around 100 to 200 milliseconds. You do what you want. You do what you want to do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning. And then we're going to set the knee as well. And so all the knee does is it essentially kind of smooths out the area below the threshold and above the threshold, meaning if the level gets kind of close to the threshold, if our knee was at 0, then we would have absolutely no compression. And then the instant that it gets just even a little bit above the threshold, we get full, complete compression. What the knee does is it kind of smooths out and gives a little bit more gray area here, where we start getting a little bit of compression as we approach the threshold, so that there's not such a stark difference between the level being below it and being above it. Again, it helps make it just a little bit more transparent overall. So I'm going to turn my auto gain back on, and we'll take a listen to what we got so far here. You do what you want. You do what you want to do. So again, we notice that the level is obviously getting louder, because on average, as we auto gain up to -12, the average signal is now louder or higher than it was before. You do what you want. You do what you want to do. You do what you want. Now, if we wanted to add a little bit of color into this, we could bring in some of the distortion. This would give us a little bit more of the sound that an actual LA2A would kind of impart on a vocal. And we've got 3 choices here between soft, hard, and clip. Sometimes you'll hear major differences, sometimes you won't. It really just kind of depends on your ear. You do what you want. You do what you want. You do what you want. Here's without. You do what you want. You do what you want. You'll also notice that a lot of times it is going to get a little bit louder too. You do what you want. And that's because we're adding harmonics. You do what you want. You do what you want. You do what you want to do. You do what you want when you want. And so that's just kind of a matter of taste in terms of what you want the tone of your vocal to be. But either way, that is squeeze compression.